Welcome to Learning Thursdays. I'm Dean Hale with the OASAS Learning and Development Unit and your host for today's presentation. Today's presentation is titled Women in Problem Gambling, and my guest is Dr. Grace Hennessy, Chief of Addiction Psychiatry for New York State OASAS. She'll be joining me in just a moment, but first a word about Learning Thursdays. Learning Thursdays are offered to behavioral health professionals as a free learning opportunity with the goal of improving the knowledge and skills of the New York State substance use disorder workforce as we strive to improve the lives of individuals needing prevention, treatment, recovery, and harm reduction services. A goal of Learning Thursdays is to support the professional development of the treatment, prevention, recovery, and harm reduction workforce. We do this by offering regular presentations that are relevant to today's substance use disorder treatment professional. As always, if there are any questions, comments, or suggestions, please feel free to contact us at the Learning Thursdays mailbox. You can use the same mailbox to express an interest in providing a future Learning Thursdays program. And now it's time to start the presentation and welcome our guest.
I want to thank everybody for who's here today. Again, my name is Dr. Grace Hennessy. I'm the Chief of Addiction Psychiatry at New York State OASAS. One of the things I do want to say in the beginning, or two things, actually, two things I want to say. Number one is I can't see questions if you're putting them in the chat or comments. So any questions or comments we will address at the end of the talk. And the other issue is that during the course of this talk, there will be some slides that show images of people gambling. I will let you know before they come up in case you do not want to look at them. Some people don't like to look at that, and I will make sure that I give you a warning ahead of time. So to start off our discussion about women in problem gambling, I wanted to talk about a woman named Anna. Anna is a 43-year-old woman who works for a consulting firm. She's been married to her husband for 20 years and has 3 high school-aged sons. She has a history of major depression, but she's not currently taking any medications. One night, she's invited to a casino by friends for dinner and just some gambling, and she actually wins $300 playing the penny slots. She starts going to the casino every weekend then with her friends. And soon she moves away from the penny slots to play the dollar slots because they are quote unquote more exciting. She starts then, and within a few months, going to the casino alone after work because her friends were just too distracting to her while she was trying to play. She sets time limits of an hour and a spending limit of $30 when she goes to the casino, but unfortunately, she ends up gambling for hours and spends hundreds of dollars each time she goes. She believes, though, that if she just goes back every night, she'll eventually recoup all these losses. About 6 months after she starts gambling, she starts leaving work early on particularly stressful days to play the slots. And she definitely notices that playing slots helps her forget about her work-related stress. Gambling also helps with feelings of sadness and loneliness that she feels associated with her marital problems. Within a year, her bank accounts are drained from gambling and her credit cards are also maxed out. She hides bank and credit card statements from her husband, so he is not aware of the extent of the financial issues. And she tells her family she's working late when she's really at the casino. Realizing that things are not going well with her gambling, she tries to cut down and can do so for about a week or 2 weeks at a time. But during those week or 2 weeks, she becomes irritable with family and her colleagues because she's not gambling. And she constantly thinks about going back and quote unquote winning big. She has strong urges to gamble, even though she knows it's caused serious financial problems for her and her family. And that also brings up feelings of guilt and shame over her gambling and her inability to stop or to not be able to stop for extended periods. She considers ending her life several times, but does not take any action to do so. Within a year and a half, she loses her job due to her absences and from work, and her husband files for divorce after discovering $100,000 lost to gambling. She realizes she has a problem and she seeks treatment for her gambling problems at age 45. So we're actually going to come back to Anna later in the presentation. I wanted to use this story sort of as a setup and a lead in to what we've sort of been seeing with gambling and what some people are calling the changing face of gambling to include more women. So the next 6 slides that are going to come up do include images of gambling. So again, if you do not want to see such images, I'm going to encourage you not to look at them. I'll wait a second before I advance. In preparing for this talk, I did a very unscientific, sorry, Dr. Cunningham, data-driven survey of some friends and family and asked them sort of, when you think of like old school gambling, what comes to your mind? Now, these are people who do not gamble. Maybe they'll do a lottery ticket when it's like $1 billion, but they're people who really are not engaged in gambling in whatsoever. And about 20 of them, but the majority of them say, gee, what I think of are a group of men at a racetrack, kind of leaning up against the rail with their race books, and they're watching the races and they're figuring out their bets. And a lot of them also leaned on sort of these old school Hollywood and TV images of men sitting at a card table with their chips, just cleaning up. And if there's some women involved, they're kind of in the background, sort of hanging out glamorously, just egging on the men. And I said, okay, so let me bring you to 2024. And what is your image of gambling in 2024? And unanimously, they all said, it's some guy betting on sports on his phone. So this is all true, but what they really didn't mention in all of this are the women. Remember, every slide I showed you, there were men and their images were of men. But women have been in the gambling world for a long time, and they may not be in the forefront, but their presence is definitely increasing. For example, women these days are just as likely as men to be up at the rail making wagers at major horse races. And this is a picture of the Kentucky Derby, where you can see the women are probably even outnumber the men leaning up against the rail in this picture. The women have also kind of moved out of that Hollywood casino image of the supportive partner to the man winning card games to be actually front and center with their own friends, playing the slot machines. And increasingly, just like men, women are now wagering on sports on mobile apps. And in our neighboring states like New Jersey and Pennsylvania, they can also play other casino games like online slots, craps, roulette, and card games like poker and blackjack right on their own casino apps on their very own phones. So I'm going to take a break now from pictures of gambling images. I'm just going to go to a regular slide. So the question comes up, like, how did this rise in gambling over time for women really sort of happen? And one of the factors really has been a concerted effort on the part of the gaming industry, just like Dr. Cunningham mentioned, to sort of normalize gambling and gambling activities for women. Now, I'm going to have 6 slides come up after this one, and these also will have some gambling images. So just want to give you that warning ahead of time in case you do not want to look at them. So one of the ways the gambling has been normalized has been to purposefully create games that may be more appealing to women or be considered quote unquote more women friendly. This picture shows the Sex and the City slot machine that debuted back in 2009. And it was a huge financial success for the creator of Sex and the City, which is HBO. And they had partnered up with International Game Technologies, or IGT, a global leader in the gaming industry. And this game, with its pink coloring, it's 9 feet tall, and its pictures of the women from Sex and the City and the logo for Sex and the City was really easily spotted anywhere on a casino floor. This screenshot shows you what the player experience is with the game. So if you're sitting in front of the game, this is what it looks, one of the spins might look like. The creators at IGT said, quote, they cranked up the estrogen, unquote, and used images of fancy shoes, diamond rings, and pretty cocktails in an effort to relate the game's symbols to the Sex and the City characters and some of their activities, such as going shopping, going out of the town to drink Cosmos and high heels, and looking for permanent male partners who may give them a large diamond ring. The player also gets the theme song from Sex and the City. So if you've ever watched it, you could probably hear it in the back of your mind. And on certain spins, as a bonus, you might get scenes from Sex and the City that play on the video that comes up on the screen. IGT's director of marketing described the Sex and the City slot machine as, quote, the perfect accessory to any girls' night out at the casino. So clearly a very strong and purposeful effort to pull in women. Another tactic has been to create more women-friendly environments and activities that take place, which is what is essentially a gambling facility. This is a website page from Turning Stone Spa and Casino upstate in New York. And the idea here is that the casino is really like a destination. It's not a place where you're going to go gambling. It's a place with a spa where it's a woman's turn to be pampered and be taken care of. And she can get a couples massage with her in this, as it shows in this picture, with her male partner. Or a lot of times, casinos now have wonderful restaurants that are owned or run by famous chefs like Bobby Flay or Wolfgang Puck. So it's sort of like that destination to go there. And there's also usually a lovely hotel that goes along all of this. So it's kind of this idea of all this luxury and comfort and pampering. And again, of what really it is a casino. So you're going to be there and you're going to be exposed to that as well. So why not engage in a little bit of gambling while you're getting pampered? And while casinos have always offered entertainment, if you think back to, the old Las Vegas days, Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr., the Rat Pack performing, many casinos are really going all in to bring in major performers and shows that some women may be more attracted to. And this is a picture of Adele, who currently has a residency, as they call it, at the Coliseum at Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas. And the ultimate goal, again, all of this, the spas, the restaurants, the fancy hotel, and the shows with people like Adele, is really to wrap around that idea of entertainment. And again, for most people, gambling is a form of entertainment. Most people gamble, they lose a little bit of money or they win a bit of money and they leave it at that. But for some women like Anna, who we talked about earlier, they may get more drawn in after they have these initial exposures. So it's a place of entertainment, but it's also a place where you can lose a lot of money. And then lastly, as Dr. Cunningham mentioned, there is much more targeted ad campaigns towards women to get them involved in gambling. This is a picture of Vanessa Hudgens, who is an actress and a singer, best known for the High School Musical show. And she's one of the first women, she may be the first woman who has entered into the world of advertising for casinos. Again, if you think about all these casino ads or these sports betting ads we get during football games and otherwise, a lot of times it's retired football players, or there might be male stars who are advertising. This one involved Vanessa Hudgens, and what the BetMGM's chief revenue officer said, quote, Vanessa Hudgens brings BetMGM to life not only as an iGaming or sports betting company, but as an entertainment experience. So again, kind of putting that idea of entertainment all around what really is sort of an opportunities to gamble, which again, most people will do okay with, but it's a way of pulling some people in who may end up with a problem. And if you read industry articles about advertisements for mobile sports wagering in particular, FanDuel has been painfully clear that they are trying to get more women to sign up. And these are two things that they did to sort of entice women into their app. So on the left-hand side is a picture of what is called Fan Fuel Extra Kick Coffee. This was an initiative FanDuel did in 2023 in association with the Women's World Cup. They partnered with a coffee roastery owned by a woman to create this coffee. And what they did is they had FanDuel trucks go to major cities around the United States, and they served Fan Fuel Extra Kick coffee to people, to the fans. Their goal was to help fans 21 and older, because in most states you have to be 21 to do mobile sports app, after a long night of cheering on Team USA. And this was because the matches were in Australia and New Zealand, which is 15 hours ahead of us. So a game 4 o'clock in the afternoon in New Zealand would be 1 o'clock in the morning here. So the idea was stay up, root for USA, have some coffee with it. Oh, and if you like the coffee, you can go buy it at our website, the FanDuel website, which of course is where you can also sign up to download the app and be part of the FanDuel family. On the right-hand side is advertising they did this year in honor of International Women's Day, which was on March 8th. So this was a post they put on X with pictures of famous women athletes and an inspiring quote about girls who play sports becoming women who lead. And if you then went to their website, if you went to the FanDuel website, they actually offered a whole bunch of special wagering on NCAA women's basketball games as their way of quote unquote celebrating the day. So again, sort of really going after this market. They're not shy about it. You should really, if you look it up, it's really quite fascinating. They're very, very clear that the women are sort of this untapped market that they really want to go after. Now, this is the last of the gambling image slides I will have for the rest of this talk. So if you were not looking, you can now look again. So while there's a lot of outward effort to draw women into gambling, there's also a concern growing in the background of behind all this glitz and advertising that women are getting into trouble and having problems with gambling. This is an article from the British Broadcasting Corporation, or the BBC, from 2019 that highlighted the concerning percentage of women in Sweden with serious gambling problems, and how for the first time in 2019, the percentage of women with a problem severe enough to be considered a gambling addiction was greater for women than for men. In the survey, it was about 5,000 people that they looked at, and among them who had a problem severe enough to be considered a gambling addiction, 64% were women compared to 36% of men. This was kind of a quiet article. It didn't make a big splash, but it was something that did get picked up by some news outlets. And the feeling was that this was probably due to the high availability of online gambling. Sweden has had online gambling of all varieties since about 2002. And the feeling was just over time that women just sort of engaged in it more and more. And in this particular year, and I've not seen a report about this since 2019, that the numbers became quite high. And again, the women outnumbered the men. So it's sort of, who are these women? So what do we know about women who have with problem gambling? Again, this Swedish survey is one data point in time, but there has been other research on women and problem gambling. So in this next part of the presentation, we'll review some of these key findings. So just to do a bit of level setting, about 1% of the US population in total, men and women, have problem gambling, or what we call now gambling disorder. And when they broke down it by gender in this very large epidemiologic survey, it was about 0.4% of women and 0.8% of men. So men definitely outnumber women in terms of the problem gambling group. But when you took out the group that were lifetime gamblers, the number of women jumped up to 1.1% and the number of men to 1.9%. So maybe a little closing of the gender gap there, but still the men close to 2 times as many had gambling disorder out of lifetime gamblers. But the challenges with these national surveys is we haven't done one in a long time. The last one was about 2004, 2005. These are very difficult to do. And while these data are quoted regularly and they are very important and meaningful, it is sort of curious to think, well, has anything changed? And while we may not have any national data, more recently, we do have some New York State data. So these are the results of the New York State Problem Gambling Prevalence Survey for adults. that OASAS did back in 2020. This is a group of men and women. So there were 3,823 individuals who completed the survey. And you can see really the majority of people in New York State who completed this survey don't gamble. So no gambling means they did not gamble at all in the prior 12 months, so about 68%. And the other big piece of this are the recreational gamblers, who are about 27%. And the recreational gamblers were the people who gambled but didn't meet any criteria for any types of problem gambling. A smaller group was at risk of problem gambling. So this group had some problematic behaviors related to gambling, but again, did not meet any criteria, DSM or otherwise, that would say this is actually truly problematic in a clinical way. The smallest groups were the problem gamblers at 0.3% and 0.4%. The problem gambling folks had one or two problems related to their gambling. And then the individuals with pathological gambling were the ones who had more serious problems where their gambling was out of control and there were significant effects on their life and those around them related to their gambling problems. When the women are pulled out of the survey, so about 2,225 women completed this survey. So it's about 58% of the respondents. So good bit over half were women. And the numbers don't really shift too much. It's not a large survey, but we still see the majority of people are either women don't gamble or didn't gamble in the last 12 months, or gambled sort of safely. They just gambled and did not have any problems. And the numbers do go down a little bit for the more serious gambling problems, for pathological gambling and problem gambling. So again, sort of showing that women are there. Men probably still outnumber women in terms of these problems, but there is sort of this significant small percentage who are having these difficulties. In addition to prevalence data, there's been a lot of other research looking at the characteristics of women who gamble. Unfortunately, I think in the gambling research in general, there are a lot of limitations. So some of them are overall limitations, and some of them, particular to our talk, have to do really in looking at women in particular who have problems with gambling. So the first one is that a lot of these studies are older. When you look at the literature, you're talking about studies, like I mentioned earlier, that large epidemiologic survey is over 20 years old. So you're looking at studies that might be 15, 20 years old. But again, because there hasn't been as much study, the sample sizes are small. So you may have 50 people, which is meaningful. But again, sometimes it's hard to draw larger conclusions out of smaller sample sizes. There can be different definitions of what problem gambling is and what pathological gambling is. So the more severe end, in terms of how many criteria people might meet according to the DSM, or on the different screening and assessment tools that people might use to assess the level of problems. Gambling studies have had a primary focus on men, and some of that has not been purposeful. It's just who was able to be in the survey. But when you do that, you end up with a body of results that are about men, and they often get generalized into everybody who has problem gambling. So that would include women as well. We don't always know that some of those things hold true for them as they do for men. These studies also are comparison studies. So there's a lot of studies of demographics, so age, where they live, what kind of games do they like to play, and again, and the prevalence rate. So how many people are gambling or having these problems. There aren't that many studies of online gambling, and particularly in the United States. As I mentioned, Sweden has had online gambling since 2002. So you do get a lot of studies from Europe, and particularly from Australia and New Zealand, that look at quote unquote online gambling. So there are a lot of studies out there, but are they relatable to what's going on in the United States? It's hard to know that. And also there's this unclear definition of what online gambling means. So in a lot of those very good studies from Europe and Australia, New Zealand, in Asia, it's all kind of lumped into one. But as we mentioned earlier, in New York State, for us, online gambling means mobile sports wagering. But in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, you've got all those other games I mentioned earlier. You can play the slots, you can play table games. So there's a lot of different things that that go into the definition of online gambling. So despite these limitations in the research, and particularly about women's findings, there are some things that have come up fairly regularly in the research, and we're going to review those now. So the first is that studies have shown that women who gamble start later in life. So they often start gambling more in their 30s and 40s compared to teens and 20s for men. It's not really clear why that may be, but some people say it may have to do with less opportunity. So maybe, in their 20s and 30s, they're working on careers or families. Remember, these are older studies, so it may not hold as true as women are having children later or engaging in careers later. But that may be part of the reason why that happens. The other issue might be social norms. It might be that women didn't want to go into the casinos. They feel like they'd be looked down on as a woman alone going to the casinos and betting. Interestingly, even though they start later, women get to severe gambling problems just like men do, even though again the age is different when they start. Women have also been shown to prefer more non-strategic games. So what non-strategic games usually are things like slot machines, scratch tickets, and things like bingo, where luck is more involved and the outcome is not really very heavily influenced by the player. Strategic games where the player does have an influence, such as poker and sports wagering, have been shown to be favored by men in most of these studies. The challenge with the non-strategic games is that there's a very short interval between the bet and the outcome, which promotes ongoing play. So if you think of slot machines, you can just keep hitting that button over and over again because you get the results of the spin so very quickly. And it may be that this preference for non-strategic games with that short interval contributes to women's faster progression from gambling initiation to problem gambling. This faster progression is called the telescoping phenomenon. We also see this in substance use disorders. So with alcohol, other substances, that from the time women initiate their gambling to the time that they start having serious problems is much shorter. It's much more contracted than it is for men. And there's variations in the studies. You'll see kind of numbers all over the place, but on average, it looks like women get to those problems about 3 years earlier than men do. Additionally, women say they gamble for different reasons than men. Women talk about gambling to escape stressful situations. These are quotes that I came across in sort of focus group research articles that I was reading. The casino was the only place where no one made demands on me. I'd go in there, meaning the casino, for the purpose of just having a break in my life and the things that were going on around me. Women also have been shown to gamble to manage negative mood states like boredom, loneliness, and sadness, whereas men really kind of like to gamble more for excitement and fun. Those terms get used more for them. And, if you think back to the example of the Sex and the City slot machine, a woman can kind of escape all these emotions and stressful situations and jump into this way more glamorous life. And again, there is this particular targeting of those types of games to try to draw women in. Women who have problems with gambling also have higher rates of past year co-occurring psychiatric disorders when they're compared to men. This is actually a study from 2008, so about 16 years ago, but it is one of the larger studies. And when they asked about in the past year, in the past 12 months, what kind of psychiatric issues did women have, women were pretty much twice as likely across the board to have problems with disorders such as major depression, persistent depressive disorder, which used to be called dysthymia, panic disorder, social phobia, and generalized anxiety disorder. Now, the numbers are low because that often happens when you ask about past years. So in the past 12 months, did you have these problems? But again, if you see, for almost all of these, women were at least twice as likely, if not slightly more, to have these psychiatric problems in the past year compared to men with problem gambling. We also see something similar with lifetime psychiatric co-occurring disorders. So women are more likely to have them. Men and women are more likely to have them overall when they engage in problem gambling. So I'll make a plug for the problem gambling learning collaborative we did in April, where we talked about behavioral health issues. So if you want to see more data on that, please go back to that talk. But in these large epidemiologic studies, they found that women were twice as likely to have tobacco use disorder when they had problem gambling, twice as likely to have alcohol use disorder, twice as likely to have an anxiety disorder, and about 1.1.5 times as likely to have any kind of mood disorder, which is usually means more major depression, but can also include bipolar disorder. What they also found is that the women experienced the onset of the other psychiatric disorder before the onset of problem gambling. And this sometimes gets referred to as the pathway model in terms of the development of psychiatric disorders in relation to each other. So, in one pathway, the co occurring disorder develops first, and then gambling is a coping strategy for the co occurring disorder symptoms. And this is what seems to happen for women. And if you think about it too, we talked earlier about wanting to escape stressful situations and uncomfortable emotions. So it kind of may make some sense that these disorders and these symptoms develop first, and then the gambling comes along later. And then for men, it seems to be quite is the opposite, that the gambling disorder develops first, and then the adverse outcomes they experience, so the financial issues, the relationship problems, work related problems, contribute then to the development of a co-occurring disorder like depression or an anxiety problem. Studies have also shown that women may have a greater likelihood of suicidal ideation and suicide attempts than men. Most studies, it looks like it might be a 3 times increased risk in comparison. There's not a lot of studies on this, but that's sort of the number that comes up. And it may be that it's the suicidal ideation and attempts may be more common with these non-strategic gambling types when they look at people who are seeking treatment for their problem gamblers. So just wanted to add this little graph because it kind of shows it sort of in a clear way. This was a study of about 1,100 treatment-seeking individuals and women who gambled in the non-strategic forms of gambling, where again, there's little or no decision making and the outcome cannot be influenced, were much more likely to have had suicidal ideation compared to the men who engaged in non-strategic gambling, and also in compared to groups where the men and the women engaged in both types of gambling. So they did strategic gambling, non-strategic gambling, they did the whole gamut. They were much more likely to have suicidal ideation. And you see something similar again with the suicide attempts. So again, there is that concern. We are concerned about people with problem gambling and gambling disorder in general having elevated suicide risks, but there may also be a gender difference there in terms of women experiencing that issue. The questions that come up then with suicidal ideation and attempts is it solely due to gambling and gambling related problems like the financial stress, or is it because of the other psychiatric disorders like major depression, or is it both? And we really do need to try to understand things like that better. And lastly, women may face greater stigma in terms of when they gamble and when they go and seek treatment. So times have changed dramatically, but women are still under a lot of pressure to uphold traditional gender roles, particularly at home, taking care of the family. And we know a lot now. A lot of older men and women are living with sort of the sandwich generation where they're looking after kids and they might be taking care of elderly parents. And the concern that has come up is that this may lead to more online gambling. In one of the few studies I could find about younger women, one of the younger women in the survey, who at that point in the survey was someone who just gambled casually, she said while her baby was napping, she might do a few rounds of the slots on her phone. Again, this was a European study where that was available. But it may be so that they get pushed more to use those applications to sort of avoid stigma. And as we know with all disorders, stigma is always a barrier to seeking treatment. And that may create problems for women. They may hold off longer before they get help. So now that we've gone over these characteristics, let's go back to Anna and kind of tie this all together with her story. So Anna really fits a lot of what we just talked about. She started gambling later in life. She was 43 years old when she started. She preferred non-strategic games. She was very much drawn to slot machines and stuck with them for the whole time. She experienced the telescoping phenomenon. She had her first real problems with gambling within a year of starting, and she was seeking treatment within 2. She gambled to escape stressful situations like her work and relationship issues, and also to manage negative mood states like sadness and loneliness that were related to her relationship. She does have a lifetime psychiatric comorbidity and the major depression, and she has a suicide risk. She has had ideation. She thought about suicide in relation to all her problems, but she didn't make any attempts. Anna also meets criteria for gambling disorder severe. She's got 8 out of 9 criteria. So she was gambling with increasing amounts of money to achieve the desired excitement. She moved from the penny slots to the dollar ones. She tried to cut back, control, and stop her gambling, but she got very irritable when she tried to do that. She was preoccupied with gambling. She gambled when she felt distressed, and she was chasing her losses. So she kept going back to the casinos in the hopes that she would win more money. She started lying to conceal the extent of her gambling, and she really lost her marriage ended, and she also lost her job related to gambling. So again, she really moved. She started gambling late, like we talked about earlier, in her 40s, but she moved very, very quickly to having a severe gambling disorder diagnosis. Anna does live in New York, so she has access to the problem gambling treatment and recovery continuum that we offer. There is a QR code on the screen in case you want to scan it. It will take you right over to the OASAS gambling website. So many ways that Anna, if she chose to get help, she could certainly do her own self-directed treatment. She might go to Gamblers Anonymous or seek, some other ways to help herself. She can call the Hope line, the 877-8-HOPE-NY, and the Hope line would connect her with a regional problem gambling resource center, and she could get referrals to treatment services, including approved private practitioners. She could also contact the problem gambling recovery centers herself. And the general recovering centers also can provide referrals to treatment services. All 12 addiction treatment centers that are run by OASAS, as well as other state certified outpatient and inpatient programs, provide problem gambling services, and that would be available to her. As I mentioned earlier, there are also state approved private practitioners who can do direct work with someone like Anna who has problems with gambling. So some other things I would encourage us to think about in terms of gambling. So Anna, and her problem gambling, let's say she came to see you in her office or she showed up for treatment at your facility, you absolutely want to screen and assess for suicide risk. OASAS wants this for everybody who's coming into our treatment programs, but particularly in this case for Anna, we talked about she has had thoughts of suicide, and there is that elevated risk of suicide for women compared to men when they have problem gambling. Of course, if you screen and assess, there should be interventions which can range from doing a suicide safety plan to perhaps having her go to a hospital if her risk is imminent for harming herself. Other things that should be done is you need to screen her for major depression, very important. She's got a history of it, and that can contribute to people continuing gambling. Also, substance use disorders and other psychiatric disorders, as we mentioned. She may need a psychiatric evaluation to get a better handle on what might be going on there, and if there's other therapy interventions or perhaps medication that she might need to help her out. One thing that comes up you see in the literature is having her keep a diary of her mood and gambling urges and behaviors to see how they relate to one another. We sort of made it kind of clear in the story, but that she was aware of this, but people may not be. And so to have someone really look at the relationship between their mood and those gambling urges and when they gamble can be an important way to understand the relationships there. You could discuss with her voluntary self-exclusion from the casino. As the New York's Council on Problem Gambling, OASAS, and the State Gaming Commission have worked together to make voluntary self-exclusion easier now. The council launched a free support program to help people recognize problem gambling and find resources to enroll in self-exclusion. Council staff are also available at licensed gaming facilities to explain the process, assist with the necessary paperwork, and connect people with treatment providers, counseling resources, and peer supports. And also, starting next week, November 12th, so next Tuesday, individuals who voluntarily self-exclude can receive free and confidential calls from a trained Hope Line staff member. So even more support, which is going to start next week, which is good news. So Anna may not be ready to quit gambling. So if she's really not at that point yet, we want to engage her in harm reduction strategies if that's really her goal. So to set a time limit and stick to a budget, Anna did already try that. It was a bit of a challenge, but she may be able to try that again. And we'd also encourage her to take frequent breaks because, people just sit at the machines and they may play over, just not move, not do anything for hours. We also encourage her not to chase her losses. So that fits in with kind of sticking with her budget. So once the money's gone, don't gamble anymore. And to really gamble more in a positive way. So when you're feeling good, don't gamble with negative emotions because that can kind of get you to keep going, and to really think about doing it when you're feeling more positive again. And this would be if harm reduction was her goal. So in terms of future directions, so there's two ways to sort of to think about this. One is in regards to our research, and this is sort of a global, not just, really the research world is looking into gambling to sort of think about. One thing in this day and age, things have changed a lot. So a lot of these studies really focused on having people choose their biological sex, male or female, man or woman. But we know that gender has sort of been a changing concept over time. So one way to look at this is to really to kind of do research looking at gender, rather than strictly as biological sex, to try to understand the gender role that may go into all of this. Other research opportunities would be to look at diverse populations of women, so women with different sexual orientations, racial and ethnic backgrounds. And a lot of these studies, the women are all white, and so the understanding of things for other women is not as great as it could be. And then also different socioeconomic backgrounds. Does that make a difference in where people are working women versus other types of women? Understanding the at-risk women gamblers. So we saw that small slice of the OASAS pie, about 4%, 3% for the women. What happens to them? What leads them to end up in a situation where they become a problem gambler? And are the reasons that they don't get there too? So sort of what happens to that group of women, and are there sort of women-specific factors that might be at play there that either push it forward or pull it back? I mentioned this earlier, but we really do need more research to distinguish among different types of online gambling as online gambling opportunities grow. Again, we are mobile sports, but other states have more types of gambling. And the sports gambler is probably very different from the slots gambler, who's probably very different from the card game gambler. And so women who engage in these, what are the differences really among them? And what can we do to sort of help them if depending on what they are working on? And again, we need to understand gambling better among younger women and how mobile sports wagering will fit in, which is a question mark at this point in time. There's definitely more women engaging in this, but what does that mean? So sort of one of the things we talked about earlier is how women sort of like these non-strategic forms of gambling. So, and sort of that rapid turnaround. So usually you think, oh, well, sports gambling, I bet on it before the game, and I have to wait 3 hours, let's say, for the baseball game to be over, an hour and a half for the hockey game to be over. But now with the sports apps, there's so much in-game gambling that you can do now. You can, bet on what's going to happen in this period. Is such and such a player going to, how many touchdowns are they going to throw in the second quarter as the first quarter is ending? And those are very much more rapid types of betting. And is that going to be something of interest to women? Again, there's still some skill involved in there, so it's hard to know, but we really do need to understand that because that is growing and women are signing up for these sports apps. The other thing that comes up is messaging about gambling harms. So as one article I read that came from England, which is a place that also has a lot of online gambling. What they did a survey of women and sort of what they talked about, and a lot of this would be true for men as well, is to provide clear and accurate information about the risks of gambling. The good news for our state in New York is that Governor Kathy Hochul on October 1st signed into New York state law that you have to list potential harms of gambling on advertising. So that's sort of good news. So people will get some more information about the harms when they see these glossy, glitzy ads that we are bombarded with on a regular basis. Women also were interested in public service messages about gambling harms specifically for them. And that may help decrease the stigma, especially if they utilize women with lived experience. If you look online about, concerns about younger people in particular in gambling, everything's about men. And this is a concern. OASAS is concerned about this. The research community is concerned about this. but the messages that might go towards men to help them decrease their gambling may not be the same that work so well for women. One example was in England, someone said there was a public service announcement towards men where they actually had a wrestler sort of pinning down a man, and the wrestler sort of represented the gambling problem, and that probably not going to appeal to women quite as well as it might to men. And then, of course, use the platforms where women go, so social media platforms, TikTok, to make sure that these messages are getting out, and again, particularly thinking about younger women. So that is the bulk of my talk. I just have a few more slides, just want to show you, just to remind you again about gambling harms referral support that OASAS has. We have the OASAS Hope Line, which you can see on the left, and then there are QR codes on the right for the OASAS online provider and program search with the list of programs with a gambling destination, and also the regional problem gambling resource centers. And there's also other online resources, the problem gambling clinical resources where you can find them. These QR codes are here, the approved gambling screens. And if you're working for a program and you're interested on how to obtain a gambling designation on an OASAS operating certificate, you can also find information on the website as well. And you can use these QR codes that I will leave up. So I want to thank you for your time. This is me. I'm Grace Hennessy. That is my email address in case you want to reach out to me directly. And this is the on the bottom are all the ways that you can connect with OASAS: Facebook, X, Instagram, so on. And also we have our podcast, Addiction: The Next Step, on the website, which are excellent series, and some of them are about gambling. So if you're interested, please check those out as well.
I want to thank Dr. Hennessy for joining me today. I hope you all find it useful while assisting clients in need of services. Your feedback is important to us. It helps us to know if we're meeting your educational goals and expectations. Once you have viewed the presentation in its entirety and completed the quiz, if prompted, please follow directions to access the SurveyMonkey website and take a moment to complete the evaluation, including suggesting any future topics for Learning Thursdays. Once again, thank you for joining us and keep up the good work.